What would you say was the main reason that Adolf Hitler didn't invade the United Kingdom during the Second World War? As far as we know, there were three major reasons why Hitler never launched his long-awaited invasion of Britain. The first was simply that he got cold feet. The second was that the British had developed radar, which meant that their airfields could be easily targeted by the Luftwaffe, making an invasion much more difficult. And finally, it was the fact that Germany did not have sufficient naval forces to mount a successful invasion. So what if they actually did? What if Germany actually had enough ships to successfully invade Britain? Would this have changed the outcome of the war? In 1940, after the fall of France, German leaders began drawing up plans for the invasion of Britain. Codenamed Operation Sea Lion, it was hoped that the invasion could begin in late 1940 or early 1941, depending on how successful the Luftwaffe proved to be. Hitler believed that with the Royal Air Force defeated, the British would sue for peace and accept a German puppet state. But if not, then German land forces would simply march across the Channel and take London. In reality, the RAF pulled through some famous last-minute victories at the Battle of Britain. The Germans also failed to fully break the Enigma code, and so the invasion plans were shelved until 1941. But what if everything went according to plan, and the Germans had taken control of the skies by the end of 1940? In that case, Sea Lion would be given the green light. And so, without further ado, let's find out just how the German army would have invaded Britain. Let's jump into it. The German Navy was certainly strong by 1940. In addition to having the largest navy in Europe, it also boasted the most powerful surface fleet ever assembled, complete with 6 battleships, 20 cruisers, and a large number of destroyers. This was largely made possible by Germany's earlier decision to focus on building surface ships rather than submarines. While this proved very effective in the opening years of the war, it left them somewhat lacking in U-boats. But that's a story for another day. Hitler planned for the German Navy to play a big role in Operation Sea Lion, although perhaps not as big a role as he originally intended. Before the French campaign, he wanted to assemble a force of around 200 ships to ferry troops across the Channel. However, he later reduced this number to around 30, fearing that such a large fleet may provoke the Royal Navy into open warfare. In truth, the Germans probably still wouldn't have been able to get anywhere near the UK with 200 ships. Not only because the Royal Navy was much larger than the German Kaiserliche Marine, but because of the invention of radar. Radar had been invented by the Germans themselves in 1935. However, they failed to see its military applications, instead choosing to focus on developing better radio technology. By 1940, the British had deployed several radar stations around the coast of England, which allowed them to detect incoming aircraft well before they reached Britain. So Hitler's plan was to first neutralize these radar stations with special high-altitude bombers. These aircraft would fly above the clouds where the British searchlights couldn't reach them. Their job was to bomb every single radar station on the south coast of England so that Britain's early warning system would be disabled. Once this was done, the Germans would deploy a series of coastal defense units along the beaches of northern France. Their job would be to prevent any sort of amphibious assault by the Royal Navy. These units would consist of special self-propelled guns which were designed to fire over the heads of infantry, meaning that they could be used to defend entire stretches of beach. Once these defenses were set up, the German Navy would sail across the Channel and begin unloading troops onto the beaches of Kent and Sussex. As soon as the first British soldiers realized that an invasion was taking place, they would retreat to London in order to warn the government. This would allow the politicians to make their way to the House of Lords in Westminster, where they would take shelter in the House of Lords chamber. At least that was the plan. But why were they going there? Why not Buckingham Palace? Well, the politicians would have gone to the House of Lords for 2 reasons. The first is that it was much closer to the seat of government in Whitehall. And secondly, because the walls of the House of Lords were much thicker than those of Buckingham Palace. You see, while it might seem odd to us today, back in 1940, it was still believed by many that London could be defended against aerial bombing. So while the politicians would hide out in the House of Lords, the Luftwaffe would flatten central London, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. It was hoped that after the Luftwaffe had done its work, the German army would enter London unopposed and take the government prisoner. Then either the British would sue for peace, or the German army would simply occupy London and establish a puppet state. So how exactly would the German army take London? Well, there were two scenarios. If the politicians had evacuated to the House of Lords, then they would have simply surrounded it and waited for them to surrender. If not, then the German army would have split the city in two and advanced on the Houses of Parliament from the north and south. Once again, it was hoped that the mere presence of the German army would be enough to force the British to surrender, but if not, then the streets of London would run red with blood. But what about the king? Would King George VI flee like Charles II did during the Great Fire of London? Or would he bravely stand his ground? Well, the plan was for the king to go to the House of Lords with the rest of the government, except for one thing. King George VI hated the House of Lords. He famously referred to the House as the unelected and unaccountable hereditary oligarchy. In truth, he almost certainly would have fled to the countryside. Perhaps he would have taken refuge at Windsor Castle, although it's more likely that he would have escaped to the safety of his beloved Scottish castle at Balmoral. So who would have led Britain in the face of a German invasion? That would have been up to the very man who led the country to victory in the war, Winston Churchill. Now, we all know that the British did not surrender in 1940, and that was down to the sheer stubbornness of both the British people and their leader, Winston Churchill. Had Hitler's forces actually managed to invade and overthrow the British government, then there's no telling how long this alternate war would have lasted. However, it's unlikely that the German army would have actually been able to capture London. Not only was the city much better defended than they expected, but the majority of the British army was composed of men from London. So even if the Luftwaffe had managed to decimate the city's civilian population, the working-class men of London would have fought tooth and nail to keep their homes from being overrun. Add to this the fact that the Home Guard would have almost certainly put up a stiff defense, and it's likely that the German army would have been in for a world of hurt. After the failure of Sea Lion, Hitler would become obsessed with the idea of invading Russia. This proved to be a huge mistake and ultimately led to Germany's defeat. After all, had Hitler stuck to his original plan, which was to focus on the West and attempt to defeat the British and Americans, then things may have turned out very differently. But as we all know, Hitler wasn't that kind of guy. He was always chasing pipe dreams, and the Russian campaign was just that, a huge pipe dream. What do you think, though? Could the German army really have overwhelmed London, or would they have been repelled by the Home Guard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.